So this is the first of the Year 13 Business Studies videos. It's also the first of the Buss3 section. Buss3 being entitled Strategies for Success. So this is basically broken down into the 4 functional areas of a business. So we look at financial strategies, we look at marketing strategies, we look at operational strategies, and we also look at human resource strategies. This unit, Buss3, is assessed by an unseen case study, and it will consist of a kind of a storyline followed by some data afterwards. It will be tested through 4 questions. The question 1 will be an analysis question of around about 10 marks, and it'll focus on one of the 4 functional areas, so finance, marketing, operations and human resources. Questions 2 and 3 will be evaluation questions of roughly 18 marks. Each of them will be rooted in one of the other 3 functional areas. And question 4 is a final evaluative question based on a major decision. So although this will be based on the 4th functional area, it is also likely to draw on the other 3 areas of the unit. So if the final one asks about marketing, you'll also probably be able to talk about finance, operations and human resources, for instance. The decision will utilise the data in the appendices to a greater extent than questions 1, 2 and 3, although it will require use of the text as well. So this first video, as you can see, functional objectives and strategy, we need to kind of consider what the functional objectives of a business are and how they relate to their corporate objectives. It also looks at the relationship between functional objectives and strategies, but as always we need with some key terms. So first of all, objectives. What are objectives? Well, these are goals or targets that must be achieved in order to realise the stated aims of the organisation, the department or the individual. The important bit here is objectives tend to be medium to long term. Corporate objectives are the goals or targets of the whole organisation, usually based on its mission aims. So the whole organisation. Corporate is another way of saying the whole organisation. And functional objectives are the goals or targets of each of the functional areas, usually based on its corporate objectives. So remember the 4 functional areas: marketing, finance, production, and mine's gone blank, HR. And you'll notice how they're kind of linked into each other. So corporate objectives are based on its aims, its mission, its long-term future, and then its functional objectives are based on its corporate objectives. So there's kind of a stepping stone of one needs to be achieved in order to achieve the next, in order to achieve the next. So next is mission statement, a statement that describes the general purpose of the organisation. All of the aims and objectives should feed into achieving this. So it's very general, it's not specific, it's not saying we will achieve this by this date and we will do it in this way. It's just saying a very broad, rough idea of what the business stands for. If you look, it also says that everything else has to follow from this. So you should be able to look, if you work in a business and think, I am doing this today because it will help achieve our mission statement. If you can't do that as an employee in an organisation, you're probably not necessarily doing something that is useful. And corporate objectives are the goals or targets, remember, of the whole organisation, usually based on mission aims. In fact, I think that's the second time I've told you that. My apologies. So let's start looking at business objectives, and let's break it down into that first one that we mentioned, or I mentioned twice, corporate objectives. So corporate objectives are designed to enable a business to achieve its aims or its mission. Remember that mission is long term and it's broad. So it doesn't set out specifically what the business wants to achieve, but it gives a kind of idea of the type of business that it is, and a corporate objectives helps to achieve that. They are set in order to coordinate business activity and give a sense of direction to and guide the actions of the organisation as a whole. They govern the setting of functional objectives, so the targets or objectives of each division or department of the business, and thus provide a mechanism for assuring that authority can be delegated without the loss of coordination. So remember, delegation is when when a manager asks someone below them to do part of their role for them. They're still responsible for doing it, but it means that they're getting the work spread out throughout the organisation. So by having an aim, a corporate objective, we can, as a manager, we can make sure that the people beneath us that we're asking to do something for us, that we're delegating to, can see why it's being done. They can see the overall aim, the objective that they're trying to achieve. So next up we have functional objectives. So these are set for each division or each department of a business. So at very least that's going to be marketing, finance, operations and human resources. Remember, we call those the functional areas of a business. So marketing, human resources, finance and operations. They're designed to ensure that the business achieves its corporate objectives and therefore achieves its overall aims or its mission statement. Functional objectives are set in order to coordinate the activities or give a sense of direction to specific parts of the business. So corporate objectives are to give a sense of direction to the business as a whole, whereas functional objectives are there to give a sense of direction to one of these functional areas. So remember, there's already a relationship here. If you think of it like an inverted triangle, at the top we have very broad aims. So very broad, not very specific. That's our mission statement. Beneath that, so far, we have our corporate objectives, which are a bit more specific. So they're a little narrower, but they're going to achieve the mission statement. And then you've been told about these functional objectives. They're even more specific, so they're very narrow compared to a mission statement, but they're there to try and achieve a corporate objective. Let me just flip this around. Now I'm going to put this in here for you just so you can have a read through actually. So I do suggest that once I'm finished talking, you pause this and have a read through. But basically it shows you in a kind of a obvious sense, in a sense that you should be able to relate to, because you've probably all heard of Hewlett-Packard. You'll see what exactly these type of corporate objectives that a business might want to achieve. So I'll just get rid of those so you can read that properly. Oh. So have a read through and see if you can think where these corporate objectives might be driving Hewlett-Packard to go. What is it? Yes, we can see here what it is they're trying to achieve, but how is it each of these corporate objectives are trying to achieve it? So just have a little read through, spend 2 or 3 minutes having a think about how these objectives will help to achieve their little mission statement. So I've kind of been hinting at it, but let's have a look at the relationship between corporate and functional objectives. So corporate objectives may vary from firm to firm, depending on the size of the business or the legal structure. Remember, legal structure is things like whether they are an LTD, whether they are a PLC or a sole trader. For example, a major objective of a corner shop may simply be to survive, whereas a multinational organisation like Hewlett-Packard, I showed you before, might be more interested in its corporate image and the possibility of diversifying. Corporate objectives and their contributing functional objectives might include the following. So what we're saying is, don't forget these two are related, and these here could be kind of generic objectives that almost all businesses at one point in their lives, in their existences, might have wanted or tried to achieve. So first of all, survival. Functional objectives that will assist a business's survival might include minimum levels of sales and sales revenue, or appropriate levels of stock and the required number of experienced or well-trained staff. So think of it like this. This is the corporate objective that the business wants to achieve. The functional objective that might be set for the HR department is to make sure at no point is the business overstaffed. Okay, so that was the corporate objective, and that's the functional objective for HR that will help to achieve this corporate objective. So next, profit maximization. Well, the functional area here will assist a business in maximizing its profits. So it might be effective marketing in order to increase sales. It might be improving profit margins by reducing costs. It could be effective capacity utilization, or it could be reducing staff turnover and staff absenteeism. So again, if you think of this as being the corporate objective, the functional objective of the operations function could be to reduce waste. So this helps to achieve this. For growth maximization, the functional objectives that will assist a business that wishes to grow might include increasing market share or retaining profit in order to finance more growth. It might be increasing capacity by expanding the number of sites, or it might be recruiting staff and improving training. And finally, diversification. Diversification just means doing something different, if you like. So the functional objectives that would help here might be the development of or getting into niche markets. It might be raising additional finance via appropriate and cost-effective sources, so making sure that they have the right bank loans, for instance. It could be achieving economies of scale, so bulk buying or getting all of your operations into one factory. Or it could be just simply good communication. So the key here is to remember these things here will help achieve these things here. Functional objectives help to achieve corporate objectives. Corporate objectives are set in order to meet mission statements. Okay, SMART. We're not just talking about how I turn up dressed to work every day. This is an acronym, so a word made up of letters to remind us of something that helps us make sure that the objectives that we set are useful. It's no good having an objective that isn't going to be worthwhile to the company because we'll waste time trying to achieve it. So what we make sure that happens is when we look at an objective, we have to make sure that it is SMART. So when we say it is SMART, what do we mean by that? Well, it stands for certain things. So initially, let's have a look at the S. So the S stands for, is our objective specific? One second. So by specific, is it clear what the objective is? Is it easily understood by employees and all our stakeholders? Is there no room for ambiguity? Is there no room for one person thinking the objective means this and another person thinking the objective means something else? Is it measurable? The word that we look for here is quantifiable. So an example might be to increase market share from 15 to 20% within the next 2 years. A dead giveaway here is numbers. Does it have something like a percentage? Is there a way of measuring whether this has been achieved or not? So, for instance, make the world a happier place. Yes, that's specific. How do we measure that though? The next one is agreed. Managers and subordinates should really be involved in setting targets. It's no use if a manager sets a target that the subordinate or someone working beneath them thinks is impossible to achieve, because that will demotivate them, and there's a good chance that it will never actually be achieved. Sometimes you might see it written as achievable. The only reason I don't necessarily go for that is it clashes with the next one, in which case agreed works better. The next one being, is the target realistic? By that, is it achievable, and is it not in conflict with other objectives? So say, for instance, that when I give the example of to increase market share from 15 to 20%, that might conflict, for instance, with having good customer service. So is it realistic given the context of the organisation? So is it a big organisation? Is it small? Has it got money? Has it not got money? But also given its resources. So it's no good having an objective of increase the number of staff we have by 100% if we don't have the money to do that. And the final one is it needs to be time bound. See, we need to be specific about, not just specific, we need to be explicit about the time scale in which we expect this objective to happen within. So say, for instance, to open 20 new stores is useless. 20 new stores when? In the next 1,000 years? We need to say 20 new stores within the next year, for instance. So there needs to be a time scale. So objectives should be specific, measurable and timed, so that it is possible to assess the extent to which they have been achieved and to ensure that people are clear about what it is they are trying to achieve. Also, they must be realistic, otherwise they can be demotivating and counterproductive. Objectives that are agreed by the whole workforce are much more likely to be achieved than those that are just imposed by a manager, for instance. So when we assess the effectiveness of an objective in a case study, always try to think about SMART. So if there's an objective mentioned in the case study in the exam, think about whether it is specific, measurable, agreed, realistic and time-bound. Try to think about the sorts of problems a business might face if these things aren't here. Okay? So let's actually think about this idea of business strategies. So a strategy, just get your head around it. So a strategy is basically a plan in the, say, medium or long term to achieve something. In this case, remember, we're thinking about objectives, so a strategy is a way of achieving objectives. So objectives form the basis for decisions on strategy. Until you know what you want to achieve, you can't think about how to achieve it. They're the medium to long-term plans that will allow the business to achieve its objectives. So such plans might include details on what is to be done in terms of finance or production or personnel or human resources, and how those plans are going to be implemented. Strategy should not be considered until the company's corporate and functional objectives have been agreed. That's just obvious. We can't come up with a strategy of how to achieve something until we know what it is we want to achieve. So the big thing here to remember, don't get hooked up on the word strategy, just think of it as a plan for the medium to long term. So let's go back to this idea of the relationship between functional objectives and strategy. I'll give you I'll work through some examples. So remember, functional objectives are set to ensure that corporate objectives are met. Once functional objectives have been set, appropriate strategies or plans can be devised to provide opportunities for such objectives to be met. So the previous slide that I told you, once we've decided what we want to achieve, we can put a plan or a strategy in place to make sure that we meet them. We will look at functional objectives and specific strategies of how to achieve them in a later video, or certainly there'll be specific ones for each functional area. But here are some examples just to get your head around them before we look at them in more detail. So a functional objective in the marketing division might be to gain more market share, for instance, in order to contribute to the corporate objective of increasing the rate of growth of the business. So a marketing strategy to achieve this functional objective might be to lower price. So I'll give you a little diagram. The functional objective could be increase market share. The idea behind this would be to contribute to the corporate objective of growing the business as a whole. So the functional objective of increasing market share will help to achieve the corporate objective of growing the business. And the functional strategy of achieving that could be through lowering price. So we decided here what it is we wanted to achieve. So we wanted to achieve more market share in order to achieve business growth, and then this is the strategy that we decided to put in place in order to achieve it. So remember, the objective came first and how we wanted to achieve it came second. A functional objective in the finance division might be to minimize costs. This could be in order to contribute to the corporate objective of maximizing profits. The strategy that could be put in place to achieve this might involve introducing zero-based budgeting. A functional objective in the operations division might be to improve economies of scale. The strategy that they put in place to achieve this could be introducing bulk buying, for instance. And a functional objective in the human resource division might be to improve labour turnover. The strategy to improve labour turnover might be to use better motivational techniques. And just some reminders of exam technique for this particular topic. So functional objectives, remember, must relate to corporate objectives, excuse me, which must relate to corporate aims. So one leads to another, remember. If they don't, then the business is likely to face problems, because if they don't all relate to one another, why are we wasting our time with a particular functional objective if we don't think it's going to achieve or help us achieve what the whole business wants to achieve? They must be related. So go through the case study, see if you can point out that they are related and how, and what impact that would have. But just as importantly, how can you prove that they're not related to one another, and what impact could that have and how? And then just a reminder, when assessing how effective an objective is, try to use SMART. So remember, specific, measurable, agreed, realistic and time-bound. If the objectives aren't SMART, why aren't they SMART? What problems will occur and what impact will there be because of these problems?